Right, and the first of my rearranging formulae questions, I'm going to look and examine this concept of BODMAS, the order you do things in. And we start at the top with the brackets. In some countries and some teachers, they call these parentheses. And you should always work out what's inside brackets first. And the next thing we do is we do all the of functions, like power of, or the exponent of, square root of, tan of, cos of, whatever you like. Okay, so any function where you can think of using the word of. Next in the order of operations, we do all the divisions. Then the multiplication, the additions, and the subtractions. And we do things in this order. And then, more importantly, when it comes to rearranging formulae, when we want to undo things, we do them in the opposite order. So it's quite important you understand the order of operations. Let's look at a quick numerical example of this. Let's just do something like, or a couple examples. Let's do, say, 5 times 4 add 2. So 5 times 4 is 20, add 2 is 22. But if you were to do the 4 plus 2 first, 4 plus 2 6 times by 5, you get 30, which shows you get different answers. It's important you do things in the right order, and here's a good example of that. Now we're going to look at rearranging formulae. Now there's two ways to do these, especially we're going to make x a subject here. So the first one we're going to try and make x the subject of the equation. So we're going to write everything in terms of x. So when we want to say make x a subject, we're going to rearrange the equation so x is on its own and everything else is on the other side. First of all, you need to know the order you're doing things in. And remember, we do our operations in this order and we undo them in this order. And first of all, I'm going to show you a simple method called a flowchart method. We start off with the thing we're going to make the subject. And we say what operations we do to it at the moment. At the moment, on this side, we times by c, and we get cx, and then we subtract d, and we get cx minus d, and we know that equals y. Now notice we go in the opposite order for undo, so we want to go in the opposite order and we undo this minus d, and you undo minus d by adding d, so you get y plus d. And next we want to undo the times by c, and we do that by dividing by c, so we get y plus d over c. So therefore x will equal y plus d over c. Now I'm just going to show you how most mathematicians will do this. And most mathematicians use flowchart methods because they're limited. They only work if there's only one instance of the thing you're rearranging, like the x. If you have cx minus dx, then it's much more tricky to rearrange using flowcharts because you don't know where to start. But for simple ones like this, a flowchart gives you a good idea how to understand the order of operations and get a good foothold on them. So let's just start off again with our y equals cx minus d. Now the first thing we want to do is we look at where x is, and we see we times by c and we minus d. So the last thing we do is the first thing we undo. Just imagine it's the same analogy as getting dressed in the morning and getting undressed in the evening. When you get dressed, if you put a shirt on first and then put your jumper over the top, you can't take your shirt off before taking the jumper off. So the last thing you put on, you take off first. Similarly with algebra. So the first thing we undo is we undo the minus d, and we do that by adding d to both sides. So we need to add d to this side, and add d to this side, cancel out the minus d to leave us cx equals y plus d. Now do notice that at this stage of the flowchart we had cx equals y plus d, and similarly we got y plus d equals cx here. Next we want to undo the times by c, so we divide both sides by c, so we get y plus d over c equals x. And we can see that we get the same answer. Right, in this one, once again, I'll start off with the flowchart method, and we're going to do x again. And if we start off with x, And the first thing we do is we times by minus 2 to get minus 2x. Then, to get from minus 2x to 2 minus 2x, we add 2. So we get 2 minus 2x. And this equals 4 minus d. And the first thing we're going to do is the plus 2, so we minus 2. So take 2 from 4 minus d, we get 2 minus d. And if we're going to times by minus 2, we now need to divide by minus 2. So we get 2 minus d over minus 2. Therefore, x will equal 2 minus d over minus 2. Now that's a bit untidy and a bit messy. Let's change the sign of each term to get rid of the minus here. So therefore, x will equal 2 times change the sign of that gives you minus 2 plus d, because you change the sign of that, over 2. The neater way of writing that is actually to write these in a different order. So you have d minus 2 over 2 as your final answer for x. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rewrite that equation out again. 4 minus d equals 2 minus 2x. 4 minus d equals 2 minus 2x. And use the BODMAS once again to rearrange. Remember, start from the reverse to undo. The last thing we do to the x, we go x times by minus 2, we add 2, so we're going to get rid of this 2 first, so we take 2 off both sides. So 4 minus 2 gives you 2, and that's taking 2 off that side. Take the 2 off this side, away from this side, and we're just left with minus 2 lots of x. Next, we times it by minus 2, so let's divide by minus 2. Although this is where we can see a more powerful way than using the flowchart method. Let's change the sign of both sides. Let's change the sign of this side to get rid of the minus sign. So you end up with minus 2 plus d, changing the sign of everything on this side. Change the sign of everything on this side, we get 2x. And now divide by 2. We're much closer to our neater answer that we got here. And actually we can just rearrange the order again, once again, d minus 2 over 2 equals x. And we can see we have the same answer. Okay, let's bring some brackets into the equation now. And we're going to rearrange and make x the subject. I'll do some without x in my next video. Now, we've got the brackets in here. That's what happens first. You add this 2 to this x before you times by e. So the last thing we're going to do is undo the e. Well, let's just do this with the flowchart method to start off with. So you've got x, and the first thing you do to it is inside the brackets is add 2 to get x plus 2. Then we times by e to get e over brackets x plus 2. And we know that's equal to minus 2f. So the first thing we've got to undo is a times by e, divide by e. 2 minus 2f over e. So we divide by e. And then we want to subtract 2, because we want to undo add 2, so we subtract 2. So you get minus 2f over e minus another 2. So x equals minus 2f over e minus 2. Once again, I'm going to do this using the more grown-up method of rearranging your equations using the equal sign. Always keep the equal sign below each other. It makes your maths neater and easier to see when you make mistakes. So the first thing I'm going to undo is divide by e. Get rid of this. The last thing I'm doing to x, I'm going to get rid of this first. So divide both sides by e. Then I'm just left with the x plus 2 in the brackets. In fact, I don't even need the brackets. Next, I need to just subtract the 2 from both sides. Subtract 2 from this side, I'm left with x. Subtract 2 from this side, I'm left with minus 2f over e minus 2. And notice you get the same answer. And again, once again, do note that at stages we get the same thing. So at this stage, we get the same answer as in our equation, showing that the two methods are essentially doing the same thing.